Hey everyone, thank you. Blah, blah, blah. Hey everyone, thank you so much for hitting that play button. This is another episode of the Dave Bullis podcast. Really quickly, a couple of things. So everyone in the Facebook group, Facebook has blocked me from actually posting in the group and in the so that's in the actual group, and then the fan page I can't post in either. So until it gets rectified, if you want to know why I haven't posted anything in the groups, that's the reason right there. So again, if you need another reason why Facebook sucks, they blocked me from posting my own groups and fan page for no reason whatsoever. So in the show notes though, but here's a shout out for Facebook. But in the show notes, I want to give a shout out to Giles Alderson. His new film Cassette. They just launched a Facebook fan page. Giles is actually producing that film. And Giles, as you know, is a guest, has been a guest on the podcast. Hell of a guy. So make sure you check that film out. It's going to be really, really cool. And again, there's a link in the show notes for the Facebook fan page. Onto a better social media platform. I at least crossed over 1,000 subscribers on on YouTube. So thank you very much, everybody, for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, on YouTube, the link is in the show notes. If you are just listening to this and want to check it out, what my YouTube channel is called, it's Real Iron Fist Films. That's actually the film production company that I've always wanted to call it, so I'm just going to keep calling it that. So that's my YouTube channel username, Real Iron Fist Films. So I would love to just keep building subscribers on that. So again, really, really cool, and thank you to everyone that subscribes. So without further ado, on to this week's episode. My next guest, latest film, Threesomething, has over 8 million trailer views on YouTube and will be released by Gravitas Ventures at the end of this month, which is August of 2018. And he has a short film that was actually on Crypt TV that has over 2 million views on Facebook. We're going to be chatting about all of these things, how he was able to do all that, talk about screenwriting, growing with a team, making mistakes, film school, acting in films that you're directing, and tons more. And even a little bit about American Horror Story and how we got into that, which is kind of cool, right? So without further ado, this is episode 222. Maybe it's lucky, all twos. This is episode 222 with guest James Morosini.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Yeah, well, I actually I started at the theater school there. And so I was looking at a bunch of different theater schools for conservatory programs. I kind of started as an actor before I became like more of a full-time filmmaker. I still am an actor, and that's what I do primarily for income and whatnot. But yeah, I was looking at different theater schools, and basically the process there is you audition at a ton of different schools with like a couple monologues, and then you hear back from some. There are callbacks for some. And when I did the USC one, there was a teacher there named Laura Zane. She was just really in touch with the kind of acting that I wanted to do. When you're coming into these auditions, you come in very like performative. You know, you're like really trying to show them how good of an actor you are, and you're kind of overdoing it sometimes. And a lot of schools really reward that. Like they're like, oh my God, you know, they were so in it. But she was just like, hey, like my monologue was from this play called Marcus is Walking, and it was like me professing my love to this person. And I was really laying it on thick, and she was like, "Hey, this is great, but just say it." And it introduced me to, and I did, and it connected me to like, oh, when, like before we started this podcast, you mentioned that sometimes people come on and they start speaking robotically. I think the same thing sometimes happens when when the camera starts rolling. Is people go into like filmmaking mode or like acting mode, when really what we're trying to capture is like as real to life stuff as possible. And I'm rambling a little bit here, but anyway, long answer short is she kind of connected me to like the kind of work I wanted to be doing. I did that program for 2 years. Then I jumped into the film school there and really, really dove into studying film and making stuff. And yeah, man, I mean, there was just, I love working with other filmmakers, and there are plenty there. So that's kind of what intrigued me about that school.
So have you seen The Disaster Artist, by the way?
I have, yeah.
So is it kind of like that where Tommy comes down to do that monologue in the opening, and it's just so over the top? Is it kind of like that? Have you experienced a lot of that?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's a funny reference. For me, it feels more like you want to. I think in every art form, it's like you really want to show people how great you've been in the past, and that's not what makes something good. Like, what makes something good isn't how badly you want it to be good; it's how honest it is. But sometimes it's harder to be honest than it is to just like try really hard. And it's important, I think, to surround ourselves with people that are like, hey, it's not about that, and like you actually don't have to do that much for it to be compelling or good,
Yeah, it's kind of like how somebody once told me that if you want to take acting for the theater versus acting for film, it's kind of like how big are you going to make the writing? It's kind of like writing, and when you learn to write in grade school, where they teach you to write really big, and then as you get better, you're supposed to write really small. But obviously for theater, you're trying to project and everything else, and then for film, it's if you do that on film, you get the disaster artist. You know what I mean? You get the room.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, I feel like what I've been thinking about a lot lately is like when we're expressing something, the thing we're often focused on is how, like, what we're trying not to say, or how we're trying to modulate the things we're expressing so that we don't come off the wrong way. But oftentimes you see like newer actors trying to show everything they're feeling, but that's the exact opposite of what we do in real life. And yeah, so I think like restraint is something that was appealing to me about that teacher and her kind of teaching restraint, because I think that's something that we're constantly practicing in our actual lives. And yeah, I don't know. I just saw this movie. I saw this series, Scenes from a Marriage, Ingmar Bergman made in the 70s. And the thing that really amazed me was like, have you seen that? Have you seen that series?
No, I haven't.
The thing that amazed me about this actress Liv Ullmann's performance is like she's trying to keep her husband there, and she just found out her husband's been having an affair. But instead of like screaming and thrashing, she's doing all she can to like be really nice to him and like, make dinner for him and even help him pack as he's leaving the house. And that's what we do in real life, man. We I don't know. We're on our best behavior a lot of times, especially when, things get bad. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I know exactly what you mean, man. It's I haven't seen that, but I'll make a note to see that, and I'll link it.
It's really great, man. Yeah, it's really such a great. It's like a 6-part series, but then there's also a film of it. My girlfriend and I watched the 6-part series, and it's pretty astounding, man. I was blown away.
Yeah, it's I really dig a lot of those old directors, or older directors. I wouldn't say, you know what I mean, but I'm going to make sure to check that out. And as we sort of talk about your career at USC, you started to actually get into film, like you were saying. You started at the acting, you acted at the theater side of things, and as you started sort of getting into film, where was that? Like, where was that? Right around your like junior or sophomore year?
Yeah, like during school, I felt like I was always connecting with filmmakers and like being like, hey, could you direct me in this thing I wrote? And I was always looking for directors to direct me and stuff. And I felt like there were certain things that were limiting me from just making stuff. Like I didn't really know how to edit. I didn't know I didn't know really what directing entailed. It felt like I was an actor and a writer, and that there were directors, and there was a bunch of special techniques that I didn't know what they were, and it felt kind of off limits to me. So felt like I was always asking other people to help me make the stuff that I wanted to make. And, I found some really rad people that I worked with. But yeah, man, I think what made me start like really getting behind the camera and making stuff was just like, I didn't want to be so reliant on other people to make stuff. I wanted to understand like the stuff I didn't know. And so after school ended, I started working more regularly as an actor. And then I made a web series. I made this really kind of scrappy web series that had a lot of really strong moments, but that was really like how I learned how to direct, was making this like 10-part web series where I'm jumping the line all the time. And I'm, breaking all of these film rules, and it's through like breaking them that I kind of understood why they're a thing.
So you were learning like sort of like the nuts and bolts of actual filmmaking.
Yeah, I really feel like I learned it on my feet from watching other people direct me, through school and a little bit before college, and then also just like falling on my face a billion times. Like before I made my first feature, I probably made like 20 short films, that I directed, and then I'd made way more than that I've acted in. So I feel like I just learned from doing, and then I would just kind of like I would try to keep track in my own head like what I didn't know, and then I would literally just like Google those questions or like look up videos of like to learn the stuff that I didn't think I really had a clear grasp on.
Oh yeah, definitely, and I think we've all had those moments where you suddenly have that epiphany, and it's like I think I've bitten off more than I can chew here. And I've had them myself. So you mentioned making this web series, but you know what? It's always a good time to learn. Like those always teach so much more than once you go out and you're learning yourself and you find out that all this is all empirical. And you're like, oh my God, you telling people later on, whether on a podcast like this, or whatever, you're like, oh my God, don't ever do what I just did here, or don't do this, or and then that's why So one of the reasons why I started this podcast is stuff like that, where it's stuff that they really don't tell you about in film school, because film school is a lot of theory, most of the time. So James, just to sort of dig a little deeper into this, what are some of the things that where you just felt completely on your face, making either your web series, which is what is that? It's called Single-Minded, right? Single-Minded,
yeah. That's cool that you know the name of it. Yeah, man. The things I learned were like I would have a funny idea that would maybe have been funny for like a 15 or 30-second thing, and then I would stretch it out to like 6 minutes, And so it was kind of learning like what's the point of like it. And it's only really in retrospect that I feel like I learned like what worked and what didn't. We made like 10 episodes, and I've since taken almost all of them offline because they just feel kind of embarrassing to me. But there's one that I left up, and it's like in it I'm jumping the line, but there's like the core that I really dig, which is that like we're touching on this like social anxiety, like people trying to be polite and stepping on each other, and like their efforts to be polite and deferential towards one another almost like gets in the way of them even being able to interact at all. But in terms of technically what I learned, I don't know. I mean, part of it was like I worked with this guy, Neil Andrew Cerullo, and he was this guy that DP'd one of the first things I ever directed. And I guess I learned a lot from him early on, like just like how to organize a crew, like the positions you really need, like, and what you don't need. There were times where like, we got like 2 camera, 2 ACs, and there was times where we had like almost a bloated production for how small of a thing we were making, where all of the technical considerations got in the way of us just being able to like do the thing we were trying to make. And yeah, I mean, I guess it made me more aware of scope and tailoring the production considerations to the scope of the thing that you're trying to execute. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
So it's like if you're doing a little sketch between two people that's low budget, and you just like you got to be aware of like what is the thing you're trying to do well, because you usually can't do everything well, so you've got to choose like, okay, for this thing I really want it to be honest and feel very authentic and be a little bit off the cuff. It's like, great, well that means you probably can't have a huge crew of people that are going to get in the way of the moment to moment feel of things, where how it looks and how it looks doesn't even really factor into like people's enjoyment of the thing you're making, because people aren't tuning in to see something that looks beautiful, or I mean that's a plus when you can do both, but often on low budget things you really have to choose what matters.
Yeah, that's pretty true. And I've seen a lot of really great looking things online that really just don't have that sort of impact, or that feel, or or whatever you want to call it. And you know what I mean? But hey, man, it looks great.
Yeah, man. That's so funny you say. Yeah, I feel like I see that a lot too, and I've been guilty of it as well, where I'm like, man, I really like, because they're seductive. You're like, oh, that looks so cool, and I think like coolness is something that can really, it can really, I think, like degrade the quality of one's work, because it's appealing, and you think it's gonna like. You think, I don't know, man. It's like it's just so seductive to me. Like, oh, I want it to like look really cool, and it just I don't really know how to say what I'm trying to say. It can get in the way of you doing something honest,
Yeah, and see, I think that's part of the thing about film school is they teach you how to make a film with a big crew, or maybe how to make a big blockbuster film, or I don't know, it's like a $10 million feature. But when it comes to stuff like that, do they really teach you the nuts and bolts? Because I had a friend of mine who, I came by one of his sets one time, and he had a master's. He had a bachelor's in film, and then he had a master's in whatever, an MFA, and he didn't know how to make a film. And I said, all 6 years of college, and you still don't know how to make a film?
Right.
Come on, you know what I mean? And it's like that. It's stuff like that where they don't really teach you that in film school. So I wanted to ask James, just out of curiosity. We were talking about film school just a couple minutes ago. When you were being directed by some other people, like what are some of the mistakes that that you felt that they made that you used to like improve upon for all your projects?
Oh, that's a great question, man. I think when you're directing something, you feel this great pressure to be a director and to keep things moving, and to like to be very on top of everything, and to get all the shots you planned for. And I think being so on top of everything can actually like make you miss what you're actually even capturing. Like I remember early on when I was working with people, like I really wanted some wiggle room and freedom to just be like, hey, can we do this wrong like a bunch of times? Like, are we able to just like not try to get it right on the first time? Because like none of us have really had that deep of a conversation of like what we're even trying to make. And I guess I look at filmmaking and storytelling as it's so collaborative that it's kind of like when you have a really great conversation with somebody where the feeling you get at the end of the conversation is like, man, I wish we could tell everybody kind of what we gleaned from this conversation, or when there's a really funny joke, you're like, man, I want to share this joke with everybody. It's almost like you're trying to get everybody on the crew to understand, all the collaborators to understand like why the joke you've told is funny or why the conversation you just had is interesting. And a lot of times going into making the thing, like you haven't had those fundamental conversations. So everybody's coming in with like, a lot of times people are coming in just because they want to make something, but they don't even know what they're really making. So everybody shows up and they're making a different thing. And then the end product is kind of muddy and unclear, and like nobody really said the thing they wanted to say, because those initial kind of patient building block conversations never happened because everyone was too in a rush to make something. And yeah, man, I guess early on, like I really loved when directors would just kind of I don't know. It feels like making stuff requires like a mutual surrender. Like an actor has to surrender to a director and trust that they know what they're doing, and kind of like sometimes take leaps of faith and try things that might feel a little weird. And directors need to trust actors where they're going, maybe this actor will do something spontaneous that I couldn't have planned out for in my shot list. And I always really loved when directors would just be like, just like surprise me, like go in a weird direction with this, like just take the ball and run with it, like where mistakes were encouraged. That always felt liberating to me.
Yeah, but when I'm directing, I always give a last take to the actors, and I just go, you know what, you can do whatever you want. Just follow the script, but you react however you want, bring whatever you want to the scene, and it's sort of like that way they have, it's almost like they can bring, you know what I mean? Like I'm just, you give them that take or takes those last, just to sort of say like, hey, look, this is kind of like your canvas to paint on, and and it is what it is. But then, the whole, at the end of the day, it's going to be whatever looks best in the editing room, right? But I think it allows a little more creative spontaneity. It also encourages a little more collaborativity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think the pressure to get it right is really it can be really intimidating as an actor, because you're like, you want to give the thing that you're showing up and basically saying, yeah, I can do this. But that pressure to get it right is usually the very thing that like takes you off track and makes it I don't know, makes it feel kind of sweaty and like over eager, and I don't know, like it I think like an actor's job is to really, like, you hear it a lot, like let the thoughts do the work. And when an actor's trying to get it right, like we're usually working too hard, we're not letting go. We're like trying to do something, and in life we're not really, like when I'm having this conversation with you, I guess I'm not trying to I guess I am actually. I'm self-conscious in this conversation where I'm trying to say the right thing. Like I don't want to say something stupid that I'm going to regret having recorded later, but I guess I'm trying in a very specific way. I'm not like, I guess if this was a scripted conversation, I wouldn't be. I'm not really sure what point I'm trying to make, so I'm gonna shut up. I've lost track a little bit of what I'm trying to say, but
it happens to me all the time, James. Have no worries, buddy. It happens to me all the time. As we sort of just take all these experiences about the good, the bad, and what worked and what didn't, you kind of you do your best to apply it to your next project.
Yeah.
And then you made you made Game Night. By the way, did you ever, when Game Night, that movie that came out in theaters, were you like, what the hell? You're like, they don't understand.
Yeah. Part of me was there. Like we had a close friend that made a short that they also called Game Night. Like a couple weeks later, I think it's like a pretty. I think it's a title that wasn't like super unique. So I wasn't really too frustrated that other people chose to call their stuff Game Night too.
Yeah, it's just I saw that and I was like, hey, what the hell? So, but no, I mean there's tons of stuff that have the same name. I remember, I had somebody on here and we were talking about something like that, and he had something that was called. It was a Christian Bale movie, and I forget the name of it. And I think it was Hard Time or Hard Time, something like that. But anyways, he had that, and somebody kept bringing it up to him, like, "Hey, there's a Christian Bale movie with the same name." And he goes, "Well, there's tons of shit with the same name. You know what I mean? Like, there's tons of stuff out there. So it's kind of hard to avoid sometimes. But
Sure.
but once you made that, did you apply like everything and just say, you know what, I'm gonna have it shot just in my living room, one location, keep down that way we're not going to 25 different locations. Did you?
Yeah, that was a really fun experience. My friend Sam Sunshine, who I've made a lot of stuff with, he came to me with that idea, and then we developed it a little bit. And it was one of my first times directing something that I didn't have the initial seed of the idea for. Like it was his initial idea, and then we worked on it together. So I felt a big responsibility to like make sure that I was capturing the thing that made the idea interesting to him to begin with. And it was a trip because his girlfriend was acting in it, my girlfriend was acting in it. A bunch of our friends from college were acting in it, and it was one of the first times all these people had worked with me as a director, and so I felt a big responsibility to like to really show up and like to really be present for that, and yeah, man, it was my first time like covering. This seems stupid, but it was my first time like covering an interaction that was taking place in a circle. So I was learning how to cover that with my camera, because it was a lot less simple than I thought it would be going in. I was like, I wasn't sure like where the sight line should be, or how the 180 degree line rule applied to that. I feel like a lot of these things you learn in like traditional film school. I kind of missed because I missed those first 2 years. So like I had to just like learn myself. You know what I mean? But yeah, man, with that, it was just fun, like kind of letting them go off the rails. And I guess something cool for that was like we showed up. We were doing the script, and there were parts of the script that just felt artificial, or like they felt good on the page, and then as they were being acted out, they felt a little stiff. And so it was fun just being like, all right, here's the spirit of what was written. Why don't you just run with this, and let's try different versions of it and forget the words. And that's what I think made those parts really work and were really fun.
Yeah, it's all that experience too, being able to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and when it doesn't feel quite right. Yeah, and I think, and we've all been there too, where it's just like you could just you feel like something's not right, or maybe this scene could be a little better, or something's not, you know what I mean, or you're not getting something or enough out of this scene. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like I you know what I mean, like we're you could just you just know where something like that's going to happen. When it happens, if that makes any sense. And you just kind of you're trying to improve it any way you can, even if it takes some rewrites. And I've been on a few sets like that as well.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I feel that.
So, it's during this time though, by the way, that you were on American Horror Story. So, yeah. How were you approached to, as an actor? Because you directed and wrote Single Minded and Game Night, so where and you acted in them as well. And so where did you eventually where did they you all of a sudden you were going more in the acting route, and how did you end up getting that role on American Horror Story?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'd done a lot of these things were happening like simultaneously. Like. It's funny, like when you look back at what somebody's done, it kind of appears that it was like a little bit like a linear projection, like trajectory. But it was like I did a pilot for Comedy Central coming out of college, and that led to, me getting opportunities to do like, guest star in Criminal Minds, and then just, and then you gain confidence and experience, and then I was and then American Horror Story was a really awesome experience. It was my first time having like a bigger role in a huge production and a huge project, and so I remember showing up, and the director, this guy Bradley Beaker, he could tell, I think, that I was like a little bit nervous in the beginning, and he was just like, he was really great at kind of like, I was showing up and I was doing the thing where I was really trying to get my lines right, and I really wanted to show everyone how great I could be. And he was like, you know what, man, like, just, okay, like the first scene was like us coming into the Roanoke house, this like old house, and the way the show works is they only give you your sides, so you actually don't know a ton of context going into the show. Sometimes, like, you're not really sure what's happened the rest of the season, so you're kind of, as an actor, having to like make some of that stuff up in your head, and some of it's accurate and some of it's inaccurate. So he was like, just come in the house and just like just we're just going to follow you with cameras, and like just come in and do what you would naturally do. And we did that a few times, and that kind of helped me find it. And then the rest of that first season I was on, it really, I don't know, like that confidence that he was able to give me in those first few scenes, I think like carried through the rest of it, where I was like, oh, this is the same. This is really like, we're doing the same thing on this bigger set that we're doing when we're in like my buddy Sam apartment, his apartment, making Game Night. It's like, it's the same thing. We're just trying to like keep things flowing organically, and like we're just trying to stay relaxed throughout it. I think that was a huge takeaway from working on that show.
And you talk about, confidence building and stuff like that. Is that something that you went back and you started to use now, like, in working with actors as a director, saying like, you know what, it's just, this is how you kind of like calm down nerves and get everyone to look and feel a little more natural on camera?
Yeah, man. I mean, so much of it has to do with confidence, and it's, a lot of people say like fake it till you make it. I don't really think you can. I don't know. I personally can't really fake it. I feel like I'm better off just admitting when I don't feel confident, so that I'm starting from a real place. And I don't know, man, I struggle a lot with like anxiety and sometimes low self-esteem and whatnot. But I think that everybody does in some way or another. And I think, like, when you're making stuff, your job is to be honest about kind of where you're really at, and starting from that place. So I guess when I'm working with actors, I want them to feel like no matter what they do, it's right in some way or another, and like we're gonna find it together. And that, like, as the director, like, I don't know the right answer. Like, I have an idea, but like I don't want to go into it just being like, hey, you need to hit this really specific target, because I think, and so I kind of like to just let myself be surprised and let it turn into something else. I don't know, like auditions for that reason are really challenging, because you come in and there's this feeling of like you need to hit exactly like the exact image that the director, the people casting it, have in mind, and that just feels like so much pressure. So I don't know, whenever I can, I try to just give myself freedom to like be wrong, and to not feel confident, and to like just trust that I'll find that confidence along the way. And if I don't, that's fine too. I don't know. I think it's easy to, I mean, so much, I feel like so much of like making stuff and acting and directing, so much of it just takes place, within your inner dialogue of being like, of just like the little voice in your head and the conversation you're having with yourself. And sometimes that can be a really mean conversation, like, why did you do it that way? Or like, dude, come on, like you're nervous, like your hands are shaking, or like you keep forgetting your lines, like what's wrong with you? And dude, like I don't know, it's the thing. One of the things that's really interesting to me about acting and all this stuff is like it forces you into the practice of like of being like kind to yourself and kind to others when there's miscommunication or when there's difficulty. And I don't know. There's a spiritual element to all of it that's really appealing to me. That like forces you to be a better person and really show and really forces you to reckon with your limitations.
Yeah, it's talking about nerves. Just as a funny story, I had a friend of mine who was shooting a zombie film, and he had this extra zombie who had he decided to do this, shoot a kind of like a pickup shot just to use for editing purposes. And it was her kind of going through this room, and every time she had to walk through the room, she would just turn and look at the camera every single time. So after about 40 or 50 takes, he was like, every single time she would just turn and look right into the camera. And he just kept saying, like, you can't do it. You can't look at the camera. So what he did was, when she couldn't do it. She literally couldn't do it. So he had to do it a couple different ways. And it was like, she had to take 2 steps. Then he yelled cut. Then he repositioned the camera, had her walk towards the camera, have her take 2 or 3 steps, yells cut. And that's how we had to shoot around that. I don't know why, but it's just a funny little anecdote. But that's how he basically had to get this, and then he ended up not using it anyway. So it's just kind of when people become self-conscious of the camera, it's it's stuff like that happens.
Yeah, dude, and it's funny. It's like when we see, it's so funny. Like I relate to being like, hey, this thing isn't going how I want it to. Like she keeps looking at the camera, and it's like it feels so important to like get that shot and to like show that. It's almost like you want to show this person that, like, you want them to get it right. And like, I don't know, man. Like a lot, like there's definitely been moments where we're trying to get this one thing, and it's not coming out exactly how I want it. So we do like, I feel like the second you're doing like 20 or 30 takes, it's like, all right, dude, something needs to be rejiggered to fit like what works for the person in front of the camera, because it's clearly like I don't know, it's like it's not working for whatever reason,
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's when you have to kind of know when to kind of move on, instead of just kind of trying to force that through. If it's not working, you got to kind of move on. But again, so at this point, you took everything you learned from American Horror Story, and everything else. And Roxy was a very cool short. That was thanks, for Crib TV. And I saw it was on Crib TV, and I was like, this is cool. And that's one of the things I checked out this morning. And really, really cool, man. I think, it works well. So, like, where I wanted to ask you, what was the idea, the inception behind that?
What was the idea?
Because of the monster creation. That's why I was asking. Again, it's a really cool short, but the monster really makes it.
Yeah, man. I think it was my first time being commissioned to make something where a company was like, "Hey, we're going to give you money to make a thing." And Crypt TV, like they're really focused on monsters. They really want to make stuff revolving around monsters, and I hadn't really done that before. So I was I had a friend over there, this guy, Dane Eckerly, who, and he was a new executive over there. And so he and I kind of talked a lot about like what this thing could be. And I was, I don't know, there was something interesting to me about like, I wanted to make something that had to do with like vanity, that it went through so many different iterations that it's funny. Like by the end of like the notes process with them, it ended up not totally being like my initial idea. So like I feel like the initial idea I had, I don't know, man. I feel like I learned about how to work with an entity like a Crypt TV through that process of like what you need to hold on to as the artist to make sure that it gets to the end intact, and what you should compromise on. Yes, that was like, that was complicated for me because I was just, I don't know, like the initial idea I had. I don't know, man. That's a tough one. We went through so many rewrites on that by the end of the day, I don't know if I really said what I wanted to say with that piece. Yeah, which is that, like, I think I was trying to say something about vanity and how easy it is to, like, once you start. Dude, I made it like a little while ago, so I kind of forget exactly what I was intending to do with that. But I don't know, man. I think it's a cool piece. I'm happy I got it out there and got it made.
So you're talking about it being a commissioned piece. Did you feel the pressure was on? Where you're like, oh shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I really did. I mean, I wanted to deliver exactly what. Dude, it's a trip, man. Like, I wanted to deliver exactly what they needed, and I was almost like, it's almost like when you're auditioning and you really want to do a good job, so you get in the way of your own humanity because you're not just like relaxed and like, like you stop being relaxed and you start behaving artificially. And I almost feel like because that was my first run at like making something for somebody else, I feel like that happened to me as like a producer and director and a writer on that, where I kind of like, I was kind of like, okay, guys, whatever you want, I just want to get it made. So like, I was willing to compromise, I think, on way too much and didn't stand my ground because I was afraid that if I stood my ground, I would lose the opportunity. And so, I get it, man. Like, looking back, I think I probably would have done the same thing again because I really just wanted to. I had pitched so many things and I tried to get so many things made, and this was the first time where I was like really getting something greenlit, and I didn't want to mess that up. And so I was willing to just do whatever they wanted me to do. And the thing is, with an entity like that, is like there are so many different voices. There's like the direct creative that you're working with, and then there's like the creative above, there's the executive above them, and there's so many people that are like, it's such a political process how notes are given and what, like there's so many weird political things that are happening that result in the email that you receive that have the notes that are going to have to be incorporated into the script. That, like, it's your job as the artist to discern what serves the piece and what is inaccurate. And I think I went into that process with too much fear that I was going to lose it to really be able to stick to my guns about what I cared about. I started to just be like, whatever you guys want. And so it ultimately became like art by committee, which I guess, which has its place, man. And for that piece, that was that for me. It was like learning how to go through that process in a way where like you'll get to make the thing you want to make, and but you like walking that fine line of like being collaborative but also sticking to your initial vision.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me too of kind of like instances like with like Josh Trank, for instance, when he got plucked out to make the Fantastic Four movie, or how James Gunn was kind of sort of plucked out of out of nowhere to direct Guardians of the Galaxy, kind of sort of, but it's kind of like when you're in that position. The reason I bring it up is because it's kind of hard to balance everything, because one, you don't really have the sort of the equity or the power yet to kind of fight a lot of the battles.
Yeah,
and they're not just going to leave you alone either. Okay, so
right.
You know what I mean. Because that's the trade-off. You know what I mean? Because you're not like a Tarantino or a Spielberg yet, where they're just going to give you money and say, "Hey, come back in 6 months whenever you're ready, whenever you're done." And then on the flip side, they hired you for a reason, but then you have to kind of sort of navigate all this.
Yeah, man. Like I like the piece and it's cool, but at the end, it also like doesn't totally feel like the thing that's satisfying about making stuff for me is going like, having this little thought or this funny idea and being able to like see that like shepherd that initial inspiration through the entire process. And it's really easy to get sidetracked and to lose that like whisper of an idea or a whisper of a thought that you're trying to like to consummate and to put on the screen. And I feel like I was almost like I let that part go. Like the thing that was interesting to me at first about that piece was like almost like a sloppy, like I liked the sloppiness of someone coming in and like trying to like make friends with this person they idolize, but also try to destroy them at the same time. And there was a nuance that excited me about the idea that I kind of let get lost in the execution of it. And dude, I think it's really important to realize like what your strengths are and where you're just kind of mediocre. And in terms of like, as a vision, like I think my strength is like capturing what feels real or like what feels kind of weird or like calling out the thing that's actually happening. And dude, you got to know your strengths and weaknesses. Like going into that, my strength was not necessarily like horror films. That was like my first horror movie I ever made. So it was like, I got a little bit seduced by like some of those tropes and didn't trust my guns as much as I wish I had. Yeah,
and I understand what you're saying too, James.
Yeah, and talking about it is weird because like I don't know if I'm being too candid around some of this stuff, but I don't know. I guess I want to be as honest as I can about like my experience making stuff and it's weird because it's like, in talking about it, it's like I don't want to color people's experience of watching it. Like I feel like that's not doing a service to it either. But like there are cool parts to it and there are parts that I wish I maybe could have done differently. And that's how I feel about a lot of the stuff I've made.
I'm going to be honest with you, James. It looks like something to me that you could turn into a full-length feature film.
That's awesome.
Because it has that feel to it. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah, man. Thank you.
But and my pleasure. And before I forget, by the way, I wanted to mention this. We have a mutual friend, and I forgot to mention it. We've been talking for 45 minutes. I forgot to mention this. We have a mutual friend in Scott Myers from Going the Story.
Yeah, dude. Oh, Scott's so great, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, I actually didn't even know that you guys or even knew each other, and then I saw your interview with him on his website. And something you said in the interview was really cool, which is you said I read a book called How to Write a Screenplay in 21 Days. And I wrote a few big movies this way.
Yeah.
But I have that book, by the way. I just wanted to kind of go into the writing aspect of this before we segue into Threesomething, and basically that is when you said you read that book and you wrote a few bad screenplays that way. Why was that? Were you just too caught up in like almost like a formula process?
That book is really cool because I like the I like the thinking behind it, which is just like just if you're thinking about doing something, just do the thing and know that can just be your first draft. Like the idea of a vomit draft is really liberating to me, and I think with that book, I hadn't gotten to the place in my writing yet where I knew what to do with a vomit draft. I didn't know how to like take that initial pass and then refine it further. And so I guess what I meant by that was like I wrote a few screenplays that were vomit drafts, and then I didn't know how to rewrite them, And now I guess what I do is sometimes I'll do a vomit draft, of a 90 to 100 page screenplay. I'll then read it and go like, here are the beats that work. Here's where I went astray and was just like kind of bullshitting. And then I'll sometimes like do an outline from that initial vomit draft and then build out the outline and then go back into just like a proper first draft. And yeah, man, but I love that book. I think the spirit of just doing the thing that you're thinking about doing is really rad.
Yeah, it's the reason I bring it up is because I know Scott. I know how the way that he kind of teaches screenwriting, and I know it's how to write a screenplay in 21 days. If I remember correctly, that kind of was like it's kind of like how I would say it's kind of like training wheels. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have to figure out how to balance yourself, then you can take the training wheels off, and then suddenly you're riding on two wheels.
100%.
So it's not necessarily a bad book. It's just what I mean.
I love it, man. No, I think it's a great book, and I think it's a great book for people that are kind of just starting out writing. Because I don't know, like books like Story by Robert McKee or even Screenplay by Sid Field, they can get kind of heady sometimes, and that can be really intimidating to when you're first starting. Because like, dude, it's even intimidating to me now, and I've been doing it for a bunch of years. Like it's just the second I'm in my head. Like, I don't know, man. It makes it not fun for me, and the second it's not fun for me, I don't think I can make anything that's worth watching or reading. Because I really feel like that's like somehow transmuted, like the experience you're having while doing and making the thing. I feel like can be felt by the audience or the reader. And so yeah, man. Like I don't know. I really love that book. I think it's worth people reading.
Well, you mentioned about the reader. I think that's so important because you have to kind of you're trying to transfer that emotion, transfer that feeling, transfer what's funny, is this scary, is this whatever, and that really is picked up by the reader, who's then gives it out to his or her manager, and then when directors read that, when cinematographers read that, when actors read that, they have to be able to sort of pick up on this as well. And I've read a ton of bad screenplays, man, and you can feel it when it just doesn't hit the mark, or it's too wordy.
When it doesn't have like a sense of life, when it doesn't feel like somebody's just going like, I don't know, when somebody's telling you a really good, like screenwriting is an oral tradition. Like it has to be like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this guy over here said this, and then this guy said this, and then oh, we noticed this happens. Like it has to be like when a friend is telling you a compelling story, they're not thinking of the best adjective to use or the best, the best way to structure their story. They're just going, and they're just like, they're in it with you. And so I think when you're writing something, like you have to be in it, you have to be, you're like, it almost has to feel like you're telling somebody exactly what's happening. And the second and the cool thing about like structuring something well before you dive into that process is that you're then not having to think about like where it goes, because some of those tracks are already laid for you. But there's also value into not knowing where it goes. Like, I don't know. I'm still really figuring out, like, when I go into writing a first draft, like whether I want to have a lot of that structure and legwork done already, or whether I just want to like go for it, see what happens, and then know that I can always go back to that drawing board stage, Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. By the way, you made a good point. I read Story by Robert McKee years ago, and then I kind of got lost in it. I was like, I said, I don't know what all this means and this and that. Well, flash forward to 2 years later, I won first place in his story competition thing.
Oh wow!
And I got to go up there and take the 3-day course and meet him and this and that.
Whoa!
And so I actually,
you feel like you got a lot out of that book?
The course I got more out of in person than the book.
Wow. I actually, like a couple days ago, I brought it back out because I've not been able to get through the whole thing. I've like, I get like 60 pages in, and then I get a little overwhelmed by it. But I think I might. Do you think I should go back in? Have you dug it?
When you can go back and kind of like review it, you can get some stuff out of it. But the best screenwriting book that I still have read is called The 90-Day Screenplay by Al Watt.
Oh wow, dude, I haven't read that.
I would definitely check that out. That is probably
Cool.
the best book, bar none, on screenwriting that I've ever seen.
Wow, cool, man. I'm gonna check it out.
And I've had Al on the podcast as well. He was a great guest. And he's not just teaching it because he's out there making movies. And he wrote a novel which was actually optioned by I want to say I don't know, Universal maybe, I forget who it was optioned by, but eventually it was called Diamond Dogs. It's been optioned, and now I don't know where they are in the process. But then he also he made a movie just recently. I'm going to have him come on and talk about that as well. And I actually had on McKee's agent, by the way, Sean Coyne. He actually came on here, and we were talking for a while.
Wow.
So when I met Rob McKee, I was like, hey, we have a mutual friend, Sean Coyne. And he was like, that bastard? And I said, yeah. So.
That's so funny. I'm ordering this book right now.
Awesome. And yeah, it's a really great book. And everybody, I'm going to link to that in the show notes as well.
Cool.
I've read pretty much every screenwriting book you could think of. But
Yeah.
speaking of screenwriting, just as a little segue before we get to talking about Threesomething, have you read that article, James, in the Hollywood Reporter? And it's entitled, like, Why Are So Many Screenwriters Getting Ripped Off? And if you look at the article, it's all about, like, the cottage industry within screenwriting, where it's like, hey, here's a script consultant. Hey, here's a class. Hey, here's my book. Hey, here's access. Have you read that article?
I haven't read that article, but I've definitely like heard and been a part of those conversations. Yeah, man, it's like, I guess I think the spirit of that conversation is like there's so much industry built around like teaching people how to do this thing that a lot of times you need to just kind of figure out your own way of doing. Like, dude, I've spent hundreds and thousands of hours in acting classes and with coaches and whatnot. Dude, a lot of times it's a matter of like what feels right and just like doing your own version of it and like taking ownership of it. And it's a lot of people make a lot of money off of being authority figures around something that's not necessarily something you can have authority over,
Yeah. And it's always about selling access, too, at the end of the day.
Sure, dude. Yeah, good point.
And a friend of mine who always says to me, he goes, Dave, always make sure before you enter a screenwriting competition, he goes, always make sure that it's actually worth the entry fee.
It's funny that we're talking about this as I'm ordering the 90-day screenplay book. It's so seductive to be like, there's another way to do this that I haven't figured out yet, and I'm constantly pulled between like being a student and then executing myself and being an authority of like, here's how I'm doing it, and I'm just going to go for it. And like, I feel like I'm constantly going between those two things. And sometimes I spend too much time as a student, like I've been watching a movie or two a day for like the past month or I've done that for a long time. Is like, I'll watch a movie a day, and sometimes I'll get sucked into like, oh, there's something these guys are doing that I need to learn how to do. And then I look back and I'm like, wait, I haven't made anything in months. I got to get back to like just doing it myself, and then sometimes I'll be making a ton of stuff and I'll have not checked in with like, what I could be learning. And so I really feel like one has to be conscious of like committing to what they're doing and then kind of reflecting but then not getting too caught up in that reflection process,
Yeah, it's and I know as we're talking about this, I just recommended a screenwriting book, but no, I since I've read pretty much every screenwriting book out there,
yeah,
I can say that there are some that actually have some worth to them, and that one of them is that 90-day screenplay book. It'd be a broad stroke just to say no, they're all bad, but it's funny because I actually was having Chuck Lorre, who's a producer, mega TV producer. Yeah. I actually was trying to get one of his producers on the podcast. And
cool.
he actually just politely refused, and the reason he refused is he goes, Dave, I wrote a book. He goes, and my whole idea was everything I could tell you in any way, shape, or form is in that book. He goes, he goes, I've had different people come to me from different podcasts of different, some have little audiences, some have huge audiences, and then there's like me who's kind of in the middle. And he's kind of like, this is what it is. He's like, I just don't want to go on every single podcast. So the book is called Elephant Bucks, and it's by a guy, his name is Sheldon Bull. I take it for, I mean, he walks the walk. So there's that book. But I just want to bring that up because it's just funny because he wrote the book just so he didn't have to go into different podcasts.
So yeah, man, it's really cool checking in about like, checking in with other people. Like, how do you do it? Are you doing some because I don't know. I'm trying to break a new screenplay right now, and I'm like I'm wondering like, man, how do other people get past this first zone of like when they have an idea for something like. Is there another way to go about from that to then the treatment or the outlining process? And like, there's certain steps that I think like we refine more and more as we do it over and over, and like as we find our own way. And sometimes it's really cool to ask other people like, hey, is there like a technique or strategy you use to like get over this part, this hump, or get through this part of the process, in a more inspired way. That's something I have friends that are like, dude, I don't want to talk about how I do it. But I'm definitely somebody that asks a lot. I try to ask as many questions as I can. And I try to not be afraid to look stupid or look like a beginner. Cause I think that's how you learn.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And just of all the things that I've learned, I just in sort of, you have a screenplay idea. How do you kind of get it out of you, and how do you kind of make sure it's good, and then this and that. I mean, and we could talk about the whole episode about that. But you did write a screenplay, and then you made the movie, and that was Threesomething. So this is your first feature length film, James. So if you could you just take us through the film?
The process of making the film?
Just like a log line.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure, man. It's about. It's about a group of people that decide that they want to have a threesome, and it takes kind of a weird turn, and they all it turns out to not be what they wanted it to be, and they all find different things that they didn't realize they were looking for. But the story's really about like fantasy versus reality, like. These people think that having a threesome is going to be this great, sexual awakening, this awesome experience. But it turns out to just be extremely awkward and uncomfortable. And one person gets left out. The other two fall in love. They just, and then the story kind of follows like them falling in love and deciding like, let's go for it. Let's get married. And them trying to manufacture an immediate relationship and the fantasy around that, and then getting confronted with the reality of like that's not how relationships are built. And yeah, man, the movie starts about it starts as being about a threesome, but I think it's really for people that will see it. I think that's just like the way in, Yeah, man. No, I'm really excited for people to see it. Comes out in a couple weeks on August 21st.
So so now I just want to talk about like sort of like the nuts and bolts of it, because like we were just talking about the log line of the film, and we're talking about and this is kind of like where the culmination of everything comes about what we're talking about. Just sort of putting this all together. So James, at what point did you set out and say, you know what, I finally want to make a feature film?
I've always wanted to, and the thing that made me not is because I felt like I didn't know how. And so Threesomething really started as kind of an experiment of just like, I want to just make one and see what I don't know. And then through making it, and so it really started as an experiment. I was just like, I really wanted to make it. And I there were some filmmakers who had made features in the way that I wanted to, like Joe Swanberg or the Duplass brothers. And they were kind of like mentors from afar for me, because I looked at their work and they just went for it. And so that's kind of what we did, like with Threesomething, a lot of it was written out, and then a lot of it was just like outline, and we'd kind of find on the day. And we went, I think our mantra through the process was like, let's figure it out and go through it imperfectly. And I'm really glad that we approached it that way, because I think a lot of very real stuff came out of that. And like the focus, it's a small film, so I think the thing that this film has is heart, and a lot of it feels very real, and like I think it captures like the awkwardness of trying to get close to people and trying to be polite, and it kind of captures a lot of the stuff that my friend Sam and I were interested in, talked a lot about at that point in time.
So did you always write together?
No. I think like the way he and I would work is like I would often like have all these ideas, and I would kind of like be rambling and like would come up with all this stuff, and then he would kind of come in and ask me questions and help refine what was working and what wasn't, and he's one of the most, he's my best friend, and he's one of the most honest people I know. So it was very clear to me when something was working, because like I'd be explaining an idea I had or a joke, and I could see on his face that he wasn't getting it, and that meant the audience was no way going to get it either. And sometimes he'd have that experience, or sometimes it would click, and I'd see the lights go on, and I'd go, "Oh, okay, great. This is what needs to happen in the story next." And I feel like that's the way he and I would work together.
Yeah, it's it's always difficult. So I find it difficult sometimes when as we were talking about earlier, when everyone has kind of like a different vision of what it's supposed to be. You know what I mean? And they're just getting everyone to kind of coincide, especially in that writing side of it. It's very hard at times. Yeah,
totally.
So, once you guys were able to write a script, and you were able to sort of use that as sort of, the basis for, actually going out and finding money and everything, putting all this together, was this sort of, because I imagine this is probably the most expensive thing that you've made thus far, right?
Yeah, it was, but it's still like we made it for so little money, man. We were looking again at like the Duplass brothers at like their first film, like Puffy Chair. Like we were kind of looking at that as like a little bit of our guideline. Like we started making it without much of a budget. Like we bought our own sound gear. We made it for pretty much no money, and then we raised money for post. Like our DP, he hadn't made a feature before. His name is Ben Meserve, and we had made the short Game Night together. We had made a few other shorts. So he was down to just like come on board and figure it out with us. And so, yeah, dude, we just started going on our own before we really raised proper financing. And then after we had shot the film, then we raised money for post. And that was a big lesson for us to see like how much that can add to the quality of the film, cleaning up all the sound, making, our colorist, Mark Todd Osborne, made it look really polished. And, the level of the film and the quality of the film, so much of that was refined in post. But yeah, man, our goal with that film was just to like keep moving forward and not let anything stand in our way. Like, oh, we don't have financing. All right, well, let's just shoot these scenes that we don't necessarily need the financing for. And we just tried to like every day keep gaining ground. And it was really hard, man. A lot of the process was like pretty painful because it felt like we were going through the dark. But I'm really happy we did it. It turned out well, and it's done a lot for us.
Yeah, it's always, whenever you can find kind of the people who have the same type of, like attitude or same type of a situation, like you said, like your DP wanted to kind of find everything out for himself as well.
Yeah,
that's kind of like the good situation to be in, because if you went out, maybe hired a DP who was, pretty experienced, it might have not worked out as well.
Yeah, I feel really lucky that like we were all in kind of a similar zone. We all wanted to make our first feature. It was that was so cool, and like you can't really go back and do that again. Like I mean, maybe you can. I don't feel like I could personally. Like my goal now is to like I have a script that I'm trying to get made, and I need proper financing for that. So I'm working and talking to a few different producers for that, and yeah, man. I mean, I think each time you do a project, the process is going to be different and is going to have to be tailored for that specific project. And so for this one, we had the luxury of like we gave ourselves the room to kind of figure it out on our feet, and we had that attitude through the whole process, and I'm glad we did, man. We learned a lot.
Yeah, it's because I know I've made that mistake where I've sometimes if you hire crew members who aren't on the same page or on the same wavelength, it creates problems. And one time we had a director of cinematography who was not a feature film cinematographer. Yeah. And he did music videos, and he wanted to do. I'm sorry, we weren't even doing a feature film, but we were doing a TV pilot, and he wasn't. He was used to the music video world, so when he came over, he agreed to. We came up with a price. It was way below his day rate because he wanted to get more into doing this type of stuff. And when he came over, it was just like completely wrong, and it was like, oh my god, we gotta cut this cord because like he and I could not get on the same page. He refused to show up for like pre-production meetings. And when I asked him about it, I was like, "You're going to be okay on the first day of shooting because you're not coming to any of these pre-production meetings." He was like, "Yeah, I'll be fine." And then the first day of shooting comes, and he and I are arguing within an hour of meeting each other.
Oh man, yeah, dude. I've had so many of those experiences. Again, dude, it's like everybody has a different way they want to do it, and if you're not able to like get on the same page with the people around you about how you want to do it, like it's like one person's trying to sail a boat, one person's trying to drive a car, the other person's trying to fly a plane. Like it's not going to work well. Everyone's trying to do a different thing.
So let me ask you this, James. You mentioned it. You've kind of run into those people too. What is the worst? Without getting into specific names or anything, but what's the worst on-set experience that you've ever had?
Oh God, dude. I don't know. I mean, probably. It's a tough question, man. I don't know. I get there's different kinds of worse, I mean, Sam and I produced this feature together, so a lot of times we would be butting heads on set, and we're also really close friends, so we're almost like brothers. So like sometimes we'd fight like brothers too on the set, where sometimes we'd be shooting in public and we'd need to get a shot quickly or in a specific way, and we'd be butting heads about the best way to do it, and we'd be doing a bunch. One of us would be like running sound, like we were doing way too many of the jobs ourselves, and so we were pretty much overwhelmed the entire time we were doing it. So the process of making this movie like wasn't relaxed, and so throughout it we would be navigating like a lot of tension between us, as well as trying to like get on the same page about our common goal of finishing it. And yeah, there was a scene that opens the movie of us boxing, and he and I were literally like yelling at each other before we were shooting. Like we were like really butting heads, and then we would have to roll camera and shoot a take and be boxing while we were in actual life really, really not getting along. So there was something intense about like throwing punches and boxing with each other on camera while we hadn't totally figured out the tension that was really existing between us. So I mean that was pretty terrible in some ways, you know.
So you had to be careful not to kill each other. So
Yeah.
or actually throw a real punch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was it was a little ambiguous. Like, hey, are we good? Like, are we like? Let's make sure we're doing this in a safe way too. You know.
Yeah, without actually, actually hurting each other. There's so many interesting stories I've heard just by asking that question. I've heard everything from people like being on set, and somebody pulled a knife on somebody else.
Wow.
Yeah, just pure craziness, man. It's some of the stories that I've heard. But you always kind of find a way to kind of diffuse a situation. It's kind of how those things kind of pop up. But
it's easy to forget that at the end of the day, like you're making a thing, like you're making a thing that hopefully people will enjoy, and like it's all a little bit pretend. Like it's easy to get very wrapped up in the process and like we got to make this movie and this movie's so important. But at the end of the day, dude, there are so many hundreds of thousands of movies being made, and like it's not that important. Like your movie in a few thousand years, like probably no one's going to see it anymore. Like it's all very impermanent and it's all going away. And it's so easy to forget that fact that like, dude, it's not that serious. Even if you're making $100 million movie where, everything is riding on it, working out, like, dude, it's like, you'll figure out a way, even if it's a terrible movie, like, I don't know, man. At the end of the day, like it's all going to be okay, and it's not always easy to remember that fact.
Yeah, I always go back and forth about that. Just to be perfectly honest with you, because like I always
I know
go back.
as I'm saying it, I'm like maybe it's not. Maybe sometimes it's not going to always be okay, but it's what I try to tell myself at least.
Well, and I always go back to hey, look, we're not saving lives.
Sure.
We're making we're making art at the end of the day.
Yeah, dude, it's like you have to pretend. You have to kind of pretend to yourself like you have to make the stakes high for yourself, otherwise it's not going to turn out well. But
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but it's sometimes easy to lose track of like, hey, I know we're pretending like this is life or death here, but it's really not. But it's sometimes hard. It's sometimes easy to lose track that like you're creating the circumstances of it being life and death, but that it's not actually life and death,
Yeah, and that's what you kind of that's where all these bad incidences come up, where it's like, what where are you at right now? Are you in the fact that it's is it life or death, or is this, hey, look, it's going to be good at the end of the day? That's kind of where sometimes where all those friction sort of comes into play.
Totally.
But James, we've been talking for about I guess an hour 15 now.
Oh,
just
cool.
Just in closing,
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to say to put a period at the end of this whole conversation?
Oh, I don't know. I don't really. I feel like eloquence isn't my strong suit, so I don't know if I'd be able to like say exactly what I feel good about saying when we end the call. I'll end up feeling like I didn't say the thing that I wanted to say. So I guess I'll just like end it with kind of a plug for Threesomething that it goes out. It comes out on the 21st. Pre-orders are available now. And I think people will really dig the film. And I'm also, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm always happy to have conversations with people. I'm not at the level yet where I'm getting hit up an overwhelming amount. So if I can help in any way, I'm always happy to. And yeah, man, I'm just another dude that's making stuff. And if there are people that want to collaborate and think we'd get along, like I'm always down to have those conversations.
Yeah, I actually followed you on Twitter. I gave you a shout out today.
Oh, thanks, man.
No problem. So cool. James, I'm going to link to everything that you and I talked about in the show notes. I'm going to link to all of James's social media accounts, so
cool.
everyone can stalk him there and ask some questions.
Yeah, you can come to my house. You can stalk me. I'll give you my address.
I'm going to put the Google Maps image of your house on the episode of this podcast.
Perfect.
So, everybody, you can find everything at davebullis.com. Twitter, it's at DBPodcast. James, I want to say thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, dude, this was so fun. Thanks so much, Dave.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.